Hello, welcome to the Current Review Podcast Week 2. Today, I have on Max Patten. Max has been covering electric cars for quite some time now. He's worked at TFL EV and most recently Out of Spec Studios. He's currently pursuing his law degree and hosting an EV politics podcast called Directly Current. It sounds very exciting, and I'll actually be on it very soon. But to start this conversation, I think we just want to talk about electric cars. And most recently, I've been driving the Polestar 2, and this is a vehicle that you own. So would you mind telling me about some of your ownership experience with the Polestar 2?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Andrew. It's always interesting seeing what you're up to. You're a very busy guy, but yeah, Polestar 2, amazing, honestly, vehicle. I'm not biased at all, but yeah, I've had mine since I think April of last year. So for basically, 18 months now at this point. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well, because I know you've been in a lot of EVs, but for me, the Polestar 2 is a very viable still competitor to the Model 3. I like its looks. I liked that it wasn't a Tesla. Nothing against Tesla. I just wanted something that looked a little different. It is
Mhm.
less efficient, but I think it looks nicer. Really love the interior. Very interesting vehicle. Good start for that brand, I think. Their upcoming, their existing products now, the Polestar 3 and the 4 are making waves in the media, and the future of that company in general is also sort of in jeopardy, which is a shame because I think their products are amazing. So yeah, that's the Polestar 2.
I totally agree. I think I really like the Model 3. I have one. It's a great car, but they're just everywhere now. And especially the further you go out west, the more of them you see. Like just your Uber in
Yeah.
California is probably going to be a Tesla. And great car, but they're just kind of boring now. And I don't think like I remember back in like 2017 and 2018 when you would see these like really early Model 3s on the road and you're like, "Wow, that is so cool." And I
Yeah.
think now the Polestar 2 is kind of filling that spot because just driving that around for a week, like people are looking at it. They're like very interested. And like people are asking me questions. They're like, what is this car? So do you get a lot of attention in it?
Yeah, I've gotten a fair amount of attention. It's interesting you say that about Model 3 because I remember, when I was like first getting into electric vehicles in middle and high school, just being interested in them, not working in the space, for out of spec or for anyone. I really, grew up admiring the Model S when that came out in 2012. So I remember
Mhm.
when the Model 3 came out, I guess it was 2017, 2018. The first folks with Model 3s were, you know, you could tell they were early adopters, they were enthusiasts, and they also had some money because it wasn't a particularly cheap car at that time, though it is, of course, much more mainstream now because they worked that price down. There's incentives that help. But at the time, it was really attention getting. And I think people knew at that point, 5 years into the brand, what a Tesla was. They just thought, you're a software engineer in Silicon Valley or something. Whereas like the Polestar now, most of the attention I get is from people who are curious about it. I'm assuming they, generally like the way it looks or they've never seen a car that quite looks like it, even though it is a sedan crossover type thing. It's not that radical, but it's very subtle with its branding. It doesn't say Polestar anywhere on the car. So the most common thing I get coming out of the car is someone just asking me, what is that thing?
Mhm. Yeah. I definitely kind of saw some similar stuff with that. Like people, I was at a EA charger and people were just like, it was a couple in a Honda Prologue and they're like, what is that car? And I don't know. I think it's
I
pretty
would have asked
cool.
them what their car is. I mean, I guess it's a Chevy Blazer, but like I feel like those are
Yeah.
really rare right now.
Yes, yeah, no, and I was talking with them
Yeah.
because I was like out in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina at a new EA charger, which was pretty cool. And
Yeah.
they were actually driving from LA to their home in North Carolina
Oh, wow.
on the with the Honda Prologue, and I was like, that's pretty cool that they're doing that with a Prologue
And
because
they liked it.
yeah, no, they really liked it. It probably wouldn't be my first choice, but they have really good sales, which is pretty incredible. Have you been
I've,
seeing that?
yeah, I've seen two or three here in the kind of Denver, Boulder, Colorado area.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting car, but like Honda, for some reason, it's doing really well with Honda's sales. And I think it's more just like a brand thing. People are like, oh, Honda makes good cars. They got to make a good EV.
Yeah.
Is it also made by GM and also the same car as a Chevy Blazer? Yeah, but the Blazer's not really a bad car either. It's just not amazing. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting vehicle. It's probably a better thing to buy the Blazer than the, or sorry, better thing to buy the Prologue than the Blazer, just because looking at resale values, you can already get like lightly used Blazers for like 30 grand, which is
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
I'm assuming folks listening to this know that, yeah, the Honda Prologue is based off the GM Ultium platform, and it's essentially a Chevy Blazer rebadged with different body panels and I think a different interior, but largely it is a GM product. And that's always been interesting to me as someone who I also like Honda cars. I think most people regard them really well. I've always thought of them as an engineering company. You know, they make incredible transmissions, incredible compact powertrains, you know, Civic Type Rs, you know, very kind of a driving enthusiast culture, but also mainstream appeal. They're reliable, all of that stuff. You know, people like the way Honda cars are engineered. And I wonder what people's reactions would be. Like, I wonder if the couple you ran into, like, do they know that that's a GM
They knew,
product?
yeah.
Okay, they
They were
knew.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're like, this was made with a joint partnership with GM. And I was like, hey, they know it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
But
not to slag
yeah,
on GM again. I mean, they've, you know, of course, they've had their ups and downs in EV world over the last two
yes.
decades, from the EV1 project to the Bolt, which is a success that they just recently sunsetted for the moment. So, you know, this looks like it could be a big hit for them. I mean, they're making what, Blazer now, Cadillac Lyric. They're making the Prologue based off the Blazer, and then the Equinox EV is hitting showrooms. So
Mhm.
they're actually going from, you know, sunsetting the Bolt last year. You know, they were selling almost no EVs to now General Motors has a lot in its portfolio.
For sure. Yeah, it's really interesting now just seeing like from when you and I started getting into the EV industry, just started covering stuff, just how vastly different the whole landscape is now. And I know it's not as much as like some of my other automotive journalist friends who like started probably like 2005, 2006, that time frame, but from even when like just like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it's like
Yeah.
there are just so many options for you to get now. And that also means there's some really good deals.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you know, I've only been covering EVs for I think 2.5 years, mostly at out of spec when I was there before I started law school. And the market has changed so much. You know, we've seen all the headlines about EV growth slow down. Is this the EV apocalypse? All that. Numerous controversies about charging infrastructure, Tesla changing prices like 80 times. Of course, tons of new people entering the market. EVs in China just completely being insane. So the market has just shifted so much. I mean, and kudos to you for covering this, you know, while you're in college still. It's just wild. But I'm sorry, I missed the last half. What was your question there?
Yeah, well, it's just we have all these new options coming out now, and just the barrier to enter is so much lower now,
Yeah,
just in terms of price. So,
true.
even we have the Equinox now, which I don't think they have the 1LT out quite yet, but they still have like the 2LT. And
Yeah.
with tax credit, you're looking at like what, 35 for a car that does over 300 miles of range.
Yeah, it's been
And
verified. I think our friend in the industry, Tom Malogny, who, you know, writes with Inside EVs, he's
yeah,
got his own channel, State of
great
Charge. He
content.
he verified it, right? Over 300 miles. I believe that's the single motor, like front wheel drive version,
Mhm.
right? That's the 2LT.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the 1LT will cost, because the 2LT is what, like, yeah, higher 30, like 37-ish grand with a tax credit. That's pretty good.
Yeah. No, that price is pretty solid. Um, I'd probably want to opt for the all-wheel drive to get a little bit more power, but
Yeah.
it's very good car for a lot of people. Um, but yeah, I mean, just to see how much the market has shifted, because like the narrative is like EV growth is slowing down. The other area that we can look at is like one of Carvana's number one used selling cars is the Model 3. It's like, and or was it the Model Y? It was either one of those. But it's still, there's just so many of options out now to get more affordable EVs. And it just kind of goes against that mainstream narrative that electric cars are these $60,000 vehicles for the 1% of buyers.
Yeah, we're finally in a place. I was just speaking actually with folks in the industry, not on the vehicle side, but on the charging side, on, you know, my podcast Directly Current, who were saying, you know, this is the first time the last couple of years that there have been products that are compelling to consumers in the American market. And what does that mean? That basically squarely means vehicles like the Tesla Model Y, crossovers that are sort of affordable. You know, I've got friends now, also my age, just a couple of years out of college, who are getting a Model Y, starting families. I mean, it's an amazing vehicle for getting people into an EV, and so is, you know, the Equinox, Prologue, I guess those are the similar vehicles, but all of the crossovers coming out, Hyundai Ioniq 5, etc., that are benchmarking what Tesla did with Model Y, which was really just kind of growing Model 3 a bit. But Americans like their SUVs, their bigger cars, and so Tesla made it a little bit bigger. They made it a hatchback. People love the Model Y. People also love the Model 3. I think you've been in a couple Model 3s yourself, but
Yes, I
yeah, I mean,
have.
you're seeing them everywhere now.
Yeah, no, they're definitely everywhere. They're I love them. They're like pretty cheap to fix too, because I had my control arms go in my first Model 3. I had control arms go bad at like 90,000 miles, and Tesla
Uh-huh.
fixed as a courtesy. And I was like, wow, that was pretty nice.
Wow.
But even like the quote was like 400, and I think that was like the only maintenance thing it needed in its like whole lifetime.
Yeah.
I don't
That's
know the previous.
That's
Yeah,
still a big mainstream knock on EVs. I mean, I'm sure you have tons of conversations with your friends and classmates and family, like I know I do, about people saying, so electric cars, there's a few things they repeat about them, like the range and charging, but also there's the fear of like, oh, aren't those repairs super expensive?
yeah, and from Tesla is not cheap, or sorry, not expensive at
Yeah.
all. Like you
Yeah.
can go to a Tesla service center and it's really not that bad to fix.
Yeah, I have
Um,
heard some mixed stories about recently. It could have been maybe because of layoffs or changes at Tesla that there's longer wait times at service
I will
centers.
say that, yes,
Um,
I can't disagree with that
yeah.
because I
And,
just on my new Model 3, I'm having like squeaks at the rear suspension. It should be covered under the basic warranty.
mhm.
At 40,000 miles, which is pretty early to get a lot of squeaks, but anyways,
Yeah.
it's like a 45-day wait,
Oh gosh.
which is not ideal. So,
Yeah, I mean, and there is a validity to expensive EV repairs, not particularly with Tesla nowadays, but like Rivian, you hear those stories of people running into a fender bender and needing $20,000 of work unless they can do paintless dent repair because of the way those vehicles are engineered. Now, of course, that's kind of just early car things. I think early Tesla Model S's were similar. We're seeing a similar situation with Lucid Airs. With the startup brands, I think, and Polestar too, I can just speak as a customer, there is a little bit more scarcity of service. Polestar has the advantage of being related to Volvo and utilizing the Volvo service network. So I go to a Volvo dealership that can work on my Polestar, and they do a fine
mhm.
job. And luckily, it's all been in warranty, nothing crazy that I needed done. But especially if you have these exotic, but very exciting vehicles, a Rivian R1T or a first generation, right, or a Lucid Air, you might be looking at some scary repair bills for things that aren't covered in warranty.
And I think that's one selling feature of a lot of legacy automaker EVs, like the Mercedes EQS, like not an objectively amazing car, but you will be able to get service for it.
Yeah.
And if you're in a different vehicle, you probably will have a lot more difficulty.
Yeah.
So
And
at
I can
least you
tell
do
you,
have that.
you have the engineering perspective because you mean like I agree with you from a technical point of view with the rest of the industry. The EQS is not an amazing car, and yet I think there's a lot of folks, mainstream customers, like you were saying, who like the mainstream service experience with their dealers. That's comfortable, but they also like the product. I mean, you get in an EQS, and it is a Mercedes interior for good and bad.
Mhm.
It's got lots of things going on, lots of
Yep.
technology, lots of screens. It's very much the polar opposite of like the minimal appeal of a Tesla, which I think appeals probably more to folks like you and I who maybe are more pragmatic or minimal. I like the Polestar 2 interior a lot, but
Yeah.
the
Polestar 2 is a great
EQS,
interior.
yeah, there's a lot of like, at least diversity in the market now between the spectrum of a Tesla Model 3 to a essentially electric S class that Mercedes has now.
Definitely. But I think just going back a few points when we were talking about service network, kind of more on the maybe business development side, I think Polestar has taken a really interesting approach to its dealership network by actually having dealerships, but the vehicles have to be sold at a fixed price. And it's kind of run by a dealership, but it's also has the experience as like a direct to consumer.
Yeah, it's an interesting hybrid approach. I think it confuses some people, even folks who are as
Because a
nerdy
lot of
as my
people think it's direct to consumer,
as
and you're
myself.
like,
Yeah,
no, it's not.
it is
Yeah.
partially, like you said, they have to be sold at a fixed quoted price on their website. Theoretically, there's no negotiation possibility, though, just like with Tesla, like there's always going to
Hmm.
be negotiation around trade ins and things like that. But yeah, they can leverage many Volvo dealerships, confusingly, not all. So there are some folks who live, I know, like one of our friends in the industry, if you watch Aging Wheels, Robert Dunn on YouTube,
Yes.
he has a Polestar too as well. He
Yes. He
lives
had a
in
great review
yeah, no,
when
he has
he
a
had like
lovely, like, very
77,000 on his.
in-depth ownership review from someone who's much more, knowledgeable with mechanical things in cars than I am, and probably you just too because of his
Yeah,
experience.
he has like a Wego and everything.
Yeah,
It's
no,
insane.
he has a quite the car collection. But no, his experience with Polestar is very interesting because he lives in Missouri, right? And for him, I
Yes.
think the closest official service center is like 400 miles away. So for me,
Yeah.
I live in Boulder, Colorado. You know, it's somewhere in Denver. For me, it's a 30-mile drive. It's not the worst thing. For some folks, it really is a barrier to getting one, and it shows you that like yeah, Polestar is a little more mainstream than Rivian or Lucid because they can leverage the Volvo kind of synergy that they have because they're both owned by Geely, which is a Chinese company. It's a very confusing structure though because Volvo just divested its investment in Polestar. So the two still share a lot of technology. I mean, you look at my Polestar 2 or the one that you've been driving and you look at a Volvo, you're going to see a lot of shared elements.
Yep.
Same thing with their existing products, the Polestar 3 and the 4, and the 3 in particular. But yeah, they're different brands, and it's kind of to me a weird approach. I think to be honest, the company's still figuring out its approach to marketing. And I've been to Polestar press events. I've spoken with Polestar people. I love what the brand stands for as an enthusiast, as a an owner, someone who likes the product a lot. But the actual brand, the service experience, it can be inconsistent for folks depending on where they live in the country and how familiar they are with the intricacies of the ownership of the company.
Totally agree. Now, slightly moving on, so we mentioned Geely, which is a Chinese automaker. Kind of coming from your approach, what is your take on just China's rise in the automotive industry? I guess it's a giant switch, but one that's very interesting nonetheless. Just China's rise in the EV industry, and do you think United States is taking the right approach with having 100% tariffs on imports?
Yeah. Well, I'll just, that's a very interesting policy. I think you can probably relate. Lots of our contacts on LinkedIn, folks in the industry, are not happy about these tariffs because
Hmm.
for, let's say, Polestar or for even
Yeah.
Tesla, it affects a lot of their imports. I mean, Tesla has a lot of American production they can lean on, and they've been able to pretty seamlessly do that. But many brands, Polestar included. I think lots of suppliers that other companies rely on, to get Chinese battery packs, let's just say, from
Yeah.
someone like CATL. I think, it's very difficult now. And then the 100% tariff on the vehicle, yeah, it just makes it, prohibitive to import in most cases. I think I understand where the government's coming from because the US absolutely needs to do something to protect against very competitive Chinese offerings that, frankly, if they were on the market with no holds barred, I mean, they might sink the industry, right? They would crater the
Hmm.
price of a lot of existing EVs in the market way, way down. I mean, if any listeners have not seen what Chinese EVs, are doing now, they need only look at NIO, look at BYD, look at these brands and the cars they're offering for, the price of a Tesla Model 3 or cheaper. Cars that
Hmm.
are in many ways more capable, have longer ranges, faster charging. The country really has just sped run EVs, partially with very aggressive subsidies and also national champions and maybe a little bit of intellectual property theft here and there. But they've made some really, really bleeding edge products that are kind of putting a lot of the West to shame.
For sure. And I think because even though there are definitely some concerns with maybe even labor conditions, stuff like that, but you just can't look at this market and ignore it because just the manufacturing prowess they have is just insane compared to what we have right now,
Yeah.
at least in their volume and diversity of EVs.
I think it was recently RJ Scaringe, the Rivian CEO, who said they were going to buy I believe it was Yangwang U8 or something, or one of the like Chinese, the names are funny, but one of these
Yeah.
Chinese EV SUVs that kind of competes with a Rivian in like an off-road context. And he just wanted to understand how are the Chinese OEMs getting such a cost advantage, not just in the labor, as you can imagine, labor is still a
Mhm.
little bit cheaper in China, but also the bill of materials and the manufacturing. I mean, their cost advantage is really significant to the point that like, and what lots of countries are doing with a 25% or 30% tariff, that can still be eaten by some of these manufacturers who can still bring competitive offerings. We've seen it in Europe where cars like the MG's line, are really
Yes.
popular. The new MG4, the lots of the Chinese cars, the BYD Seal. I mean, they're just everywhere now.
Mhm. Yeah, that's another interesting thing, I think, just slightly on that topic, is a lot of these European automakers that are being bought out in part by Chinese automakers, and then they're just building the cars in China and then selling them back to Europe. But with like the European brands like MG, we see that with like the Cyberster and all their other vehicles. And oh, sorry, Lotus was the one I was going to
Oh
bring
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Is
Also
Lotus
noted
is
Geely. Yeah.
Yes, and that's really interesting now how you have the car built in China and it's very they just took a totally like a 180 on the entire brand.
Yeah, right. Because Lotus makes these light, stiff sports cars, and the Lotus Electra, their newest offering, is built in China. It's a very heavy, very techno, philic, heavy electric SUV that's very fast and capable, but
Mhm.
very not like the Lotus that people are used to.
Yeah, for sure. I would still love one though. That would be such a cool car.
Yeah. And in many ways, it's funny because I believe that is based off a similar platform to the Polestar 3 and the Volvo EX90 in the US. And
Really?
yet it uses a better battery because it has a higher voltage architecture. So it
Hmm.
can charge much quicker. It's, I think, capable of discharging quicker too. So they outspec it with motors that are more powerful. But I believe elements of that architecture are shared. It's just that Lotus seems to be getting the best stuff because also they have the most expensive vehicle, maybe.
Interesting. So, what do you think a good approach is for the United States? I guess this is such a big loaded question, but just with the Chinese automakers, like how do you think we should approach electric cars and manufacturing in the United States to just keep that competitive edge building?
Well, I am not a manufacturing expert myself, but speaking with folks who are, as we are on my podcast, Directly Current, I think there's a
Hmm.
really optimistic story to be had that manufacturing is pivoting. It's slow, but lots of, in like southern states, are realizing in particular, let's say South Carolina, Georgia, that building
Yeah,
EV plants, in association with Ford, Hyundai, GM, has all these partnerships with American startups.
yeah.
There's a lot of interesting synergies that can happen. Um, that sounds too buzzwordy. Let's just put it, in real stakes. American jobs that can be made for people,
Hmm.
really good paying jobs. And we've seen turbulence for sure in the US EV industry in the short term. And for some of these manufacturers like Ford and GM, it's a really tough pill to swallow at the moment to take all of this capital expenditure on really risky projects for EVs. But these are the investments they need to make for the future. And, if we're getting lithium processed in Arkansas, and we're building Hyundai's locally in Georgia. That's going to really be good for these local economies. The states love it. The governors, I'm sure, will love it. And so I think that's going to turn the tide on some of the negative sentiment that we've seen previously in the U.S. around EVs.
Interesting. So do you think some of the progress that can be made for manufacturing should be more done on like the state/local level? Because I mean, we're seeing like, oh, like an example in North Carolina, um, the governor championed basically getting VinFast there, and with big subsidies. And then South Carolina here, we got like Scout Motors, and then Polestar is also doing some manufacturing. So do you think it's something more on the state level that should be do you think the state level is where a lot more change can happen to at least getting manufacturing plants in the United States?
I think so, in large part. The federal government does have a role here. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed 2 years ago, has already been a massive, massive change. And of course, the scheme of consumer electric vehicle tax credits, as well as business ones, and
Hmm.
also like the just the expenditure, right, for charging infrastructure. I think these are areas where the federal government, along interstate highway corridors, can kind of spur investment, as well as some of maybe the very large projects that do require interstate collaboration. But those examples you just said, like VinFast and the governors of local states, they want this. They want these jobs. They want these opportunities, and I think it is going to transform state economies. And so, as polarized as the electric vehicle debate seems, like we're in a national election right now in the US, and it seems like the Republican candidate very much does not like EVs or doesn't want the government to force them on people. And then the other side, and we're kind of seeing this with the Biden administration, is very gun-ho on EVs. So it's very polarized nationally. At the state
Hmm.
level, people don't care. These are really good jobs, and they know. I think people can say all the FUD, spread all the misinformation they want, most people know implicitly that EVs will be the future sooner or later. So I think that seeing this opportunity come is really exciting. I mean, look at Rivian in Normal, Illinois, right? They have made a
Mhm.
huge center for hiring talent at an engineering level, at a manufacturing level. I think they're investing in like locally in the education of the municipality and the state as well. That's really exciting. So, and then of course, folks like yourself, are independently kind of coming into this industry as well. But hopefully, more people can have a pathway into that. And I think that's what these state opportunities in particular will afford people.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree. But it is interesting, like just on the political aspect of it, just how polarizing electric cars are. But I think the way to alleviate this is really just getting people behind the wheel and experiencing them. It's like I've talked with so many different EV owners, probably from all political ends, and they're all just super passionate about the product. And the reason
Yep.
they got passionate was because they drove one and they really liked it. So I think that passion will just transcend any political interest.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an emotional element, and we see this too because I think both of us circulate in car community. Some people really get attached to the sound of a V8 or a V12 engine, and there's
Mhm.
nothing to replace that in EV world. But by and large, for most people who drive cars as appliances and happily drive their Priuses, their Honda CRVs, what have you, you're going to get them in a Blazer EV or a Prologue or a Kia EV6 or whatever it might be, or a Ford Mach-E, and they're going to really like it. They're going to love how quick it is. They're going to love the
Mhm.
smoothness, and then they're going to love their their lower bill with electric as it compared to gas, because maybe they have free charging at work, or maybe they have a state incentive to install a level 2 charger in their home, and they charge at night when power rates are really cheap, and it's going to work out in that case to be a much better deal for them than a gas car.
Mhm. And especially when you mention like the engine sound, that's like one thing a lot of people say, but it's like if you look at the average person's car, it's like a 2012 Honda Accord or something. It's like that is not a car
Not an
that
emotional
has any
experience.
emotional, yeah, there's nothing about that at all. And then if you go from that to like even an appliance, the Model 3, which is very, I would say it's probably the closest car to an appliance
Mm.
that you can get. And that's going to be way more fun. It's going to be a lot more fun to drive. It's
Yeah.
going to be just a better experience overall. So yeah, I think I would probably take any electric car over any like mainstream gas car in that regard. And I think I would probably have a little bit more of an emotional connection to that. Maybe
Yeah.
not an emotional connection, but a connection of some sort.
You're passionate about it for sure. I think it's still local, in the areas. I don't know exactly what it's like in North Carolina, but I imagine there's pretty mature infrastructure. I know around Denver, Colorado, even in the Rocky Mountains, we have great charging infrastructure, both for Tesla and non-Tesla EVs. And of course, that's unifying now in the US, but the infrastructure is pretty good here. I've noticed traveling to California, and I'm wondering if you could speak to this because I know you've been
Yeah.
there a lot too. Inversely enough, you would think California, very early market for EVs, lots of EV owners. They must just have chargers in abundance. It must be great. And it's actually in lots of parts of the state pretty awful in terms of the
Very, yeah.
congestion, the queues for chargers. I mean, there's just not enough infrastructure, particularly in the non Tesla world, I guess the world of public investment, right? Where things have
Hmm.
not been done very well. And there are rideshare drivers waiting hours to charge their cars
Yeah.
on the weekends.
And I think that's a bad thing is just as much as let's support the adoption of EVs, I think the worst thing to do is just throw them out to like people who don't really know how to operate them.
Yeah.
And then you have to like talk with them and be like, all right, like you don't need to charge 95 to 100 on the supercharger. Like that's not going to be that ideal.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, living in California, that was when I had the Chevy Bolt for a little bit, which
That
I
was when you
eventually
were
got.
interning with Lucid last summer, right?
Yes.
This
And
okay.
that was on car number I was on several cars in California,
Okay.
but
Were you like
that was
I think I remembered you mentioning this on the Batteries Included podcast. You were like renting a different one each week or something?
almost, yeah. So basically, the long story short with these cars, is when I first got there, I did some freelance work for a car dealership in San Francisco that it's
Mm-hmm.
called Evercars. It's a really
Yep.
cool dealership. And they gave me like an Ionic 5 for a few days. So I was driving that around, SEL rear wheel drive, pretty nice. Um, and then the next week they swapped me into a Kona EV for like a week, like 2019. pretty fair car. Like I think for the price, like 16, 17 grand with the tax credit, that's a good option for like a second car.
Yeah.
Didn't
That's
quite.
my girlfriend's favorite electric car, weirdly enough. She get a gas Kona, and if
Mhm.
she could choose, she'd want to get the Kona EV. It just unfortunately for her, the market when she was getting it, they were much more
Mm,
expensive than a Chevy Bolt, which is what she ended up getting. But the Kona EV, that's a fun shape for lots of people. It's very practical.
yeah.
Looks funky like a lot of the Hyundai cars. So some people really like those.
Yeah, no, it's a really good car for the price. Didn't quite quench my performance clench or my performance desires, but it's still a good car overall. Like I can imagine like for cities, but then again, I also have to realize that not everyone is like me and they want something that has really good handling and stuff. But like for what it's worth, it's a really good car.
Yeah.
And so I had that for a little bit. Then I got a gas rental because I felt like I was overusing my. I didn't want to overstay my welcome with them just lending me the cars. And then so I split a rental with my roommates. We ended up in a gas powered CX5, and I was like, I just can't drive a gas car. Like I just returned it
Yeah.
early, and then
Wow.
went to Hertz, got a Chevy Bolt for
Uh-huh.
a little bit. It didn't have any charging cable in it with the car, which kind of sucked because we were keeping it at our Airbnb and then just
Good
driving
choice.
to work. So I ended up complaining to Hertz, and then they were like, "Well, you can take the Solterra because it has a charging cable in it." And I was like, "You know what? Why not?" And that was a mess. The Solterra. I don't think I saw anything above 40 kilowatts DC fast charging it.
We see a lot of actually Subaru is a huge brand in Colorado because
Mhm.
people love the image of their gas cars, the all-wheel drive capability, whatever the marketing perception or the reality is. That's what people buy into, and so we see a lot of the Solterra EVs here, and I think there's some good incentives and lease deals for them in particular. Colorado has amazing state incentives, but
Oh yeah,
the Solterra EVs, I've run into so many people who love theirs, and then I
it's
ask them,
crazy.
do you road trip it? And of course, the answer for most of them is no. We have another car at home, or we never go more than 50 miles. And for that duty cycle, Solterra is perfectly fine. It's by no means inspiring,
No.
but it does a job.
Yeah, I think road tripping with that was probably one of the worst EV experiences I've had. Just the fact that I was trying to show my mom how cool it was because my parents flew up. My dad really likes EVs. My mom's a little more on the edge.
Yeah.
But I was trying to show them like, see how nice this is because I was like, yeah, this car charges at 100 kilo. It was the worst charging car.
Uh,
Three separate chargers, barely above 40 kilowatts. And then once you got to like 50%, it would be like at 36. And I'm like, what's the point of even sitting here?
oh,
It's
that's
so
painful.
bad.
Yeah.
Um, and then complained to Hertz again, and then I got a Kia EV6 for a little
Mm.
while, and
That's a
that
big
was
improvement in charging.
oh yeah, and we put on I think 30 like 3,800 miles in that car, so put on a lot of miles
In
and
how long?
like under a month.
That's
So
amazing. I love that.
yeah, we did 1,100 miles in a weekend, uh, which was
Nice.
insane. And then when I
Yeah, I
brought it
mean,
back to Hertz, they were like, "How?" They're like, "This was 1,000 miles when you got it, and now it's like 4,700." And I was like, "Huh, odd."
that's me and my Polestar in Colorado. I mean, there's so many, I mean, California even more so, right? So many
Mhm.
beautiful things to go to. I go on road trips all the time. And it's not the best EV to road trip. It's not a Model 3. It's not as efficient. It doesn't charge particularly amazingly, but it's better
Yeah.
than the Solterra. And I think
Mhm.
when I first got it, I put 4,000 miles in the first full month of ownership because I
Wow.
also drove it from Oregon where I picked it up
Oh
back down to
gosh,
Colorado. So,
that's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I gotta do some long road trip like that too. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think yesterday when I was driving the I DC fast charge and it took like around 30 minutes to go from like 20 to 80%. I mean, which is fine. I mean, I don't think it's not like a deal breaker, I don't think for me, but
Yeah.
I mean, it still works out fine because you go in, plug in, grab a bite to eat, and then by the time you're back, it's probably almost done charging.
Yeah,
So,
it's still the stand. I mean, you tell most people, how fast a Polestar 2 or Model 3 charges, 30 minutes, 10 to 80, and they're like, what? They don't, I mean, a lot of people who aren't into EVs don't even realize they're that quick, let alone get them in an EV6 or a new Porsche Taycan that can, do 10 to 80 in less than 20 minutes. I mean, people really have no concept of, at least in an ideal world with chargers working, how well these things can road trip.
I guess before we end this, you enjoy your Polestar 2.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any road trip ideas lined up for the future with it?
Oh gosh, so many. I think in a couple weekends from now, my girlfriend and I will go to Grand Teton in Wyoming from
Okay.
here in Denver, and that's
How
going
many
to be the
miles is
most
that?
interesting trip yet. I'm a little worried, and you just reacted because you know. So I'll give some context. I have to again praise Colorado because like not just in terms of incentives, in terms of charging infrastructure throughout the state, it's great. We just did a road trip to Telluride, 7 hours away from Denver in a gas
Wow.
car. It was perfectly fine. So many charging options between Electrify America, Tesla Superchargers, Magic Dock, ChargePoint Express units. I mean, lots of options. Never felt any kind of range anxiety. It's a Polestar 2, so I had to charge like 2.5 times, a lot, on a trip like that.
Hmm.
But none of it, all the stops were perfectly fine. And of course, you can just go and get a quick snack or go to the bathroom. But going to Wyoming, I'm a little worried because if you look on PlugShare or these resources to find DC fast chargers, it is sparse.
It's just
It's
like looking at
there.
the map, probably.
It's possible. And
Yeah.
I've done the pessimistic calculations, assuming worst possible efficiency and all. It's all possible. It's just
Hmm.
tighter than you'd like it to be, and there's not a lot of backups. If let's say like Electrify America decides to shut one of those stations down that weekend, then that trip's not happening. So I think it'll be fine, but it's definitely shows you that some states, like Wyoming in particular, are not super friendly to EVs at the moment, which is a shame because the part of the Inflation Reduction Act was giving these states their own money to work with charging stations, and some states like Wyoming don't seem to have done a lot with that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, I wish you good luck on the trip. I bet that sounds
Thanks.
like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Max, thank you again for coming on. I think we had a fun conversation.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Always happy to talk EVs with you.
Absolutely.